Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting. It's Tuesday, May the 5th, and I'm calling our meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. Before we begin, I'd like to provide a few reminders. Assistive listening devices are available for anyone who may need one during tonight's meeting. Please see the Deputy Clerk, who can help you sign one out and get set up. We kindly ask that devices be returned at the end of the meeting or before you leave, or you'll get a bill, so that they be collected and made available for future use. Please also note that washrooms are located down the hall to the left, and in the event of an emergency, residents are asked to exit in an orderly fashion using the stairs located outside of council chambers. Should the staircase be unavailable, residents are asked to proceed down the fire escape located at the back of council chambers. And if assistance is required, please see staff and ask for help. Moving on to our moment of silent reflection this evening. Before we do have our moment of silent reflection, I'd like to share with you some thoughts about the tragic accident that happened on Highway 401 last week. So as probably you all know, there was a tragic accident on the highway just east of Port Hope, which claimed the life of an OPP officer from the Northumberland Detachment while he was in the line of duty. This devastating loss has had a profound impact on families, colleagues, and first responders across the community, many of whom knew the sergeant personally. The officer's funeral will take place tomorrow, Wednesday, May 6th, in Cobourg, where the community will come together to honor their service and sacrifice. We extend our deepest condolences to the officer's loved ones and offer our sincere gratitude to first responders who attend the scene. The heartbreaking events of last week serve as a solemn reminder of the risks faced every day by those who keep our communities safe and also respond to such horrific circumstances. With that, please join me in a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Moving on to our land acknowledgement. The municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest before we begin tonight's meeting? Seeing none, we do not have any correspondence this evening, and now we're going to move on to items for consideration, starting with 4.1, presentation by Sruthi Lee, Manager Financial Planning, for our 2027 Budget Council kickoff. Already starting.
Good evening, Council. It really does seem like I've only met you a couple of months ago about the 2026 budget, but I am happy to announce that we have launched the 2027 budget year internally, so I'm here today to kick it off with you. From a process perspective, we are now well into the implementation of the 2026 budget and also the evaluation and audit of the 2025 budget as well. We have begun the pre-planning phase internally early April, and we're well into that right now. We're 1 month in. And also working towards a preparation and submission for later this year. I just wanted to remind everyone a little bit about how the timeline went last year with the Strong Mayor's legislation coming into play. So the mayor directs staff to prepare the budget. Staff prepared the budget and then presented to council. Council recommended any changes directly to the mayor through motions. And that's got us to the end of our pre-budget phase. Once we have the mayor's budget in place, it kickstarts the timeline. We have 30 days, or council has 30 days to formalize any amendments. The mayor then has 10 days to veto any of these amendments, and council then has 15 days to override any of these vetoes. And then once this time period is passed, the budget is now deemed approved or adopted. These timelines can be reduced through mayoral decisions or council resolutions. Every year, we bring forward a roadmap to council to be able to set some expectations for the kind of information that you will be receiving throughout the year, to clarify some of the checkpoints, and also internally to allow for some resource allocation. So some of the items I would like to highlight for this year would be the recurring annual reports that will come into play during budget deliberations. So there's the grant update, the user fees and charges that does feed into our 2027 budget. Our annual year-end updates for the building reserve, parkland cash in lieu, as well as our DCs. We have our annual asset management update, and this will be the first year that we're doing a bit of a routine update and not a large update from a levels of service perspective. And then we have our 2025 audited financial statements. In the other notable items category, we have the kickoff presentation today. We have the actual budget presentations that will come forward later. The tax levy allocation, we are going through a 10-year utility financial plan and rate study that we are anticipating will be brought forward to council later this year as well. Our council and non-union compensation review, and our strategic asset management policy update. This slide here shows you the timeline with both the election and kind of the preparation side by side, so we can get an idea of where we'll be throughout the year in terms of the budget process. So we have, like I mentioned, already begun budget preparation internally. We're working through our capital and salary plans right now. So our budget preparation will start in April and take us through to October, which on the election side coincides with the nomination and election period. Once council has been inaugurated, there will be some council orientation material that may be directly related to the budget or items that will aid in budget deliberations. With the budget presentations, we're aiming for December and January. I just wanted to also highlight some of the internal improvements that we've made over the 2026 budget year and also the 2027 budget year. The budget's always a continuous learning process. We learn every year. Our needs change. We adapt to those changes as well. So last year, or rather this year, would have been the first time we did an official internal budget survey for the process for staff. We got a lot of good feedback, and we were able to incorporate a lot of those suggestions into the 2027 budget process. A few years ago, we introduced budget clinics for staff to be able to support them through their budget preparations. Happy to report that it's going really well, and there are staff that have been utilizing those clinics. We have also introduced micro training sessions to be able to build staff knowledge on the budget process and the evolving expectations from a finance perspective as well. We now have a formal budget working group that involves a few key players of the budget, and we are formalizing multi-year considerations into the process this year as well. One exciting new thing that we are incorporating this year with the multi-year lens is we're incorporating or utilizing, really leveraging a lot of the GIS tools that we have for future budget planning. We've made some improvements to the way that the capital process works. So if you recall, a couple of years ago, we changed the capital process to be led by the asset management team because we were well into our way of actually preparing a robust asset management plan. We're very much continuing that process, and we've tweaked a lot of the criteria and prioritization metrics that we're using internally to determine which capital projects should be going forward. In 2026, we also worked with our vision, mission, values that were in play at that time, keeping in mind that the new strat plan was in the works, and we used elements and principles of the new strat plan in the 2026 budget preparation. Now that we have a formalized strat plan, we will be using those new pillars and the new goals and initiatives to guide our budget process this year. So internally, we're looking to develop a little bit of an implementation plan, so we're able to look at it from a multi-year lens, develop financial considerations from a multi-year perspective, set some measurable outcomes as well, and finally be able to build that forward-looking forecast. These were some of the highlights from the 2026 budget. I just wanted to highlight again because some of them were one time and occurred only for 2026, but a lot of them will continue into 2027. So I wanted to highlight it so we didn't lose sight of it. So one of them would be the asset management. So we have a standing direction through our asset management plan to contribute 2% of the property tax towards the infrastructure funding gap every single year. So that will continue into 2027. Our challenges still continue with a low tax base growth, and also impacts on development charge revenue. OPG growth will still be an item in our considerations very heavily. Last year in 2026, we did the second phase of realigning the budget from like a salary gapping plan perspective, which we will no longer be doing in 2027 now that we're caught up with the phasing in. Our goal is still going to be to leverage more non-levy sources of funding, whether that's through grants, other reserves, and minimizing impact to the taxpayer. We're going to be implementing the new strat plan, as I mentioned before. And in 2026, we've obviously taken into account the operational impact of the election that won't be applicable to 2027. Some considerations that we had in mind when preparing the 2027 budget is obviously operationally how the election impacts our work plan for the year, and also added in some time to be able to provide some education to the new council to transition them to be able to actually contribute at the budget deliberations. So this was already in the slides, so I'm not going to go too much into detail there. From a communications perspective, our communications plan for the budget year is still evolving. So updates to come, but we will still have an engagement page up. We will still have avenues for input. We'll just be formalizing the communication plans in the coming weeks. I mentioned growth earlier and some of the challenges that we have with growth. So this slide here shows you the last 4 years of new assessments. So new assessments would be the growth in our tax base that would reduce the expense burden on an individual taxpayer. So we've been trending at 0.5% or less, but if we look back at our DC studies or our utility rate studies, we were projecting higher. So we haven't really caught up to the growth that we were anticipating, so that obviously creates some short-term challenges. But looking at our planning applications here, a little bit more of a promising picture. We have a lot more planning applications in place. This does not mean that all of them will ultimately translate to a building application, but still good to see. From a building occupancy and permit applications, you'll see that we kind of peaked in 2022 and we're starting to go back down and stabilize. The hope is that a lot of those planning applications will ultimately translate to building permits and occupancy permits. Once we do have the occupancy permits is when the information ultimately flow through to MPAC and be incorporated into our assessment base. So before we start the budget, I did want to highlight a few items. So we have pre-approved items. So this is not a specific pre-approved item for 2027, but we did enter a multi-year agreement for our membrane replacement. And this was mainly to realize some cost savings. So that is definitely something that is a pre-approved item. We have the 2% infrastructure annual increase that we have committed to as part of the asset management plan. We have our general economic adjustments, whether that's just regular inflation, a cost of living adjustment, or union increases that will have to be incorporated. And we're also looking to phase in some of the items that we had previously funded through the reserves in 2026, because some of them are recurring items. We want to be able to slowly phase them back into the tax levy so we can reduce our reliance on those funds. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much for coming and doing this kickoff. It truly does feel a little bit like Groundhog Day. Having said that, I think it's just a good reminder of what the process was last year and the changes that were made. And now I'll just turn it over to council for questions or comments. Councillor Clare.
I appreciate you mentioned the impact of the election this fall on the budget process, and I know it's been great actually the way the budget process has been spread out throughout the year, even for council's uptake over the course of this term. But it does occur to me that that means that there's going to have been a lot of information shared with this council when it might be a very different group who will ultimately be going through the budget process. So could you speak a little bit to what the plan is for, I guess, reviewing and updating so that those councillors have that same understanding as going into budget as those of us who maybe were at the table over the course of the next 6 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our plans with the clerk is to start accumulating this information into a sort of budget binder that we will be able to provide to the new council as well. And then once I believe the new council has been elected, there'll be an internal review of what education pieces might need to come forward from a training perspective to be able to fill in those gaps.
Any other questions or comments from around the table? Okay, well, a good start and a lot of work ahead, so thank you very much. The recommended motion is for us to receive this for information. Can I get a mover and seconder for this? Moved by Councillor Mink, second by Councillor Darrell. All in favor? And that is passed. Moving on to item 4.2, report DS0726, free housing and additional residential unit zoning bylaw amendment. Recommendation report ZB06 2025. Does council have any questions or comments? Did you want to speak to this at all? Any opening comments before we put some?
Introduce the report, that's okay.
Okay, perfect. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, yep, so you prepared recommendation report for zoning bylaw amendment Z06-2025, which is a municipality-initiated zoning bylaw amendment. The recommendation reports has recommended zoning provisions to permit more flexible additional residential unit development and innovative housing development throughout the municipality. These recommendations are based on feedback from an open house that occurred in September 2025 and a statutory public meeting that occurred in December 2025. These recommendations reflect opportunities that identified by staff through applying zoning provisions in our day-to-day work, as well as reviewing zoning bylaws of other jurisdictions and how they affect ARU and innovative housing development. So as discussed in my recommendation report, there are conceptual provision and definition documents attached to the report, which were introduced at the December 2025 public meeting. These documents have progressed through feedback and research to create proposed provisions and definition documents, which is reflected in the draft bylaw that is attached to the report for this evening that we are recommending approval for. So in short, and as I said, the provisions we are recommending are intended to make it easier to develop ARUs with increased gross floor area and bedroom counts, as well as innovating housing technologies, which may result in more affordable housing options throughout the municipality. And any questions from council, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you for that introduction to the report. And I'll now turn it over for questions and comments around the table. Yes, Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So thank you for the report and incorporating many of the issues that were previously raised. There's obviously been some clear, meaningful work that's been done to move us closer to something more flexible and a more modern framework for today. I have a couple of concerns, but my greatest concern at this time is regarding the section about the rural servicing. So the bylaw explicitly addresses the private water servicing and wells, including hydrological studies, but it is quite silent on the septic systems. And I find that this is a major gap for rural residents and property owners that want to put in an additional residential unit that is separate from their building. The septic is often a limiting factor. This bylaw, as it is quite ambiguous. It doesn't address the septic, although it addresses the well, and they go hand in hand with each other. The challenges that happen in the rural area for a well is a lot of these wells are aged and they're fine for the home, but attaching an additional residential unit onto it now puts a lot of extra pressure on that old septic system that may last for a long time and doesn't need to be replaced, but will if you add on an ARU. And the other challenge is that the old septic systems with the septic bed is quite large. So to have an ARU actually physically being able to attach to the septic tank in many rural areas is impossible. So allowing that ARU to have a separate new modern septic tank that is attached only to that unit seems more practical, and it opens up that more options for more people, and it aligns with the well and the septic. So I have an amendment to this motion, but I think that there's a number of other meaningful discussions that will come out of this. So maybe I'll return to that amendment after we have some more discussion.
Did you want to just for the sake of keeping track of where the thinking is, maybe folks can build on it or add to it? Do you want to just share what you're thinking in terms of the amendment?
Yes, so it would say that council approve the additional residential unit zoning bylaw amendment in principle, subject to the following revisions. One, private sewage servicing septic, that section 4.2.1.1 be amended to include where municipal sanitary service is unavailable, an additional residential unit may be serviced by an individual on-site sewage system subject to compliance with the Ontario Building Code. A new and separate sewage system may be permitted where it is demonstrated that the existing system does not have sufficient capacity or where site conditions warrant. The installation of a new sewage system to service an additional residential unit shall not require the replacement of an existing system servicing the primary dwelling unless otherwise required by the Ontario Building Code.
So before I move on to other council members that want to speak to this issue, I'm wondering if staff wants to comment or reflect on Councillor Mink's concerns.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. So as part of the zoning bylaw review, what we've proposed this evening are provisions that conform with the official plan. Now, I can't recall the exact section in the official plan, but I do believe there's a section in our official plan that does require additional residential units to share the same services, those septic systems, with the existing primary dwelling existing on the property. So we haven't recommended that provision, similar to what you've just discussed. For that reason, it's in short, it's not conforming to the official plan, and therefore at this time we can't recommend it. However, as I noted in my report, there's going to be an upcoming official plan update, and that's something we could take a look at then if it's deemed appropriate.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, Councillor Mink.
So as a follow-up question, as a council, I understand that we don't want to open official plans and zoning bylaws on a regular basis, but since we are talking about this now, and it can have significant impacts to families making these changes that that bring more affordable housing options and really closes a lot of the social gaps that we have, such as senior living, mental illness, adult children trying to find housing. It closes a lot of those gaps, which families are now required to do. So at a local level, I think that if this council is able to bypass waiting for official plan amendments, if we're able to amend it as a housekeeping item, I would like to know if that's an option.
I can speak to that through the mayor. Yes, that's an option for council. Council may provide direction pursuant to your will this evening.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to you, Director? If there's a list of things that we would like to open in relation to the official plan, does it make sense for us to collect them all as a group and then bring them forward as opposed to doing them one by one?
Thank you, Mayor. To answer your question, since we are about to engage in an official plan review, I would recommend that the items be raised by council at the initiation of that official plan review process so that we can ensure they're captured in that official plan review. If council was wanting to raise them separate from the comprehensive review that we're about to undertake, I would say that would be something that staff need to consider in terms of time and resourcing to pursue an official plan amendment before pursuing a broader official plan review process.
So I'm going to just for clarity then, if theoretically there was more than one amendment that was the will of council, would it make more sense in terms of time and resources to bundle it all together and bring it forward as opposed to doing one-offs?
That would be right. It always would make more sense once you're opening up the official plan. However, depending on their relationship to one another, it may still equate to the same amount of time and resourcing, especially as it relates to going out to the public and asking their opinion on any proposed changes. So in some respects, it could make sense if they all relate to, say, housing, for example. But if they are relating to various parts of the official plan and themes, then it may still equate to the same amount of time and effort from a staff perspective as we'd be looking at each of them individually and needing to research them individually in relation to the existing official plan without making bigger structural changes that we would anticipate making in the official plan review process.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Councillor Todd.
Thank you. Ken, my question is around, I think, just more of the process in which we do it, because I was noticing when we go through the documents, we're linking the criteria for ARUs to the size of the existing building, not to the size of the lot. And that becomes problematic simply because we may have two lots that are the same size. You know, someone bought a lot because it's got a smaller home, it's more affordable, but because we're tethering it to the small house that's on it, you know, that particular owner would probably benefit more from having an ARU and have extra income coming in, but they have to have a smaller house, whereas there could be a bigger house on a same size lot, and they get the benefit of a larger ARU simply because we're tethering it to the building sizes, not the lot sizes. I'm hoping you can just walk us through the logic behind why we're tethering it to the building that's already on it versus the lot size, when what we're really trying to do is increase the number of units we have available in the municipality.
Yeah, through the mayor. So additional residential unit development is intended to be, as per the definition of additional residential units, subordinate to the primary dwelling. So it's supposed to have that secondary nature to the primary dwelling, and that's something we try to maintain through the provisions while trying to balance in, greater gross floor area, bedroom counts, stuff like that. So we tried to balance that, but you do raise a good point, and it's.
If I may add to some of that, thank you, Ken, and through the mayor. Yes, we agree that we completely understand the logic of your question, Councillor Todd, and I know this has been raised by other councillors as well. And really it amounts to where we are right now with respect to our existing zoning bylaw and broader planning framework through the official plan. Our zoning bylaw in regards to how ARUs are implemented is really structured that the ARU be subordinate and secondary in nature to the primary dwelling unit. If we were to, say, attempt to make a change to equalize the size of an ARU with a primary dwelling unit, we would run into broader issues in our zoning bylaw that we would have to address. For example, I'll use an example of a triplex dwelling as it relates to our current zoning bylaw. So in our current zoning bylaw, a triplex dwelling, which is three equal, let's make it very simple, is just say 3 equal-sized units in one building, is only permitted once you reach the Res 3 zone in our urban area, and it's not permitted at all in our rural residential. And so, essentially, if we were to create equal-sized or allow for an ARU to be equal in size to the primary dwelling, essentially we're permitting triplexes on every lot, which isn't a problem in practice, but as it relates to our current structure of our zoning bylaw, it would require us to make very larger structural changes to the zoning bylaw, and then it would come back to the official plan and as it relates to how we implement density through the official plan, because now we have equal-sized dwelling units that are going to be considered towards density calculations in our official plan. So I do see these changes coming down the line in the future, and we see many municipalities having moved in that direction. And I would say it's certainly something that's going to be looked at in future actions identified in the staff report.
Thank you both for that clarification. It's really helpful. And so, again, for maybe further clarification, what we're talking about, and Ken, when you make reference to the ARU being subordinate, how much of that is prescribed by the province, and how much of that has Port Hope just adopted, and it's within our control? So as we look at this desk, as we move forward about changing this, how much of this is within our own ability to change versus what we're stuck with because of the province?
Thank you for the question. I can take that, Ken, and through the mayor. Right now, we've seen quite rapid changes as it relates to both federal and provincial direction as it relates to ARU development. And I think what began as something that came down as permitting more accessory, subordinate in nature dwellings, that direction certainly changed at the higher level of government, and we don't see that same requirements coming down from, let's say, province, and particularly the federal government through their recent housing accelerator fund programs. They spoke to 4 dwelling units as of right on properties. So really kind of opening up what you can consider as ARUs. So I would say that there's not the provincial restrictions right now. It's more so the local framework that we need to modify.
Councillor Clare.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to do a big emphasis on my preamble just because I really, really appreciate all of the changes that have been made in the last 6 months from the original proposal. I think this is much, much closer to achieving that council-directed policy goal of removing barriers and facilitating more ARUs. So thank you so much for all of that. And I really did appreciate, I could see the feedback reflected in the changes that you've proposed. I did read it, though, from that lens of if the goal here is to maximize the number of ARUs. To me, any restriction we put on ARUs is working against that overall policy goal, and therefore should have a very, very strong rationale for being included moving forward. And I appreciate, I had a long conversation with Director Desta about the constraints, and I recognize that one of the rationales is constraints in our zoning bylaw in terms of all of those other sort of cascading requirements that we have to meet, and as well as the OP. And I think the other one, and I think this is reflected in the staff report, is also consideration for the overall community and the impact on community of this infill. There are still, to me, a couple of provisions that don't quite meet past that test of having a strong enough rationale that I'd like to propose we could push even further. One of them is height. You know, I think the height provisions are there really from a neighborhood character perspective, but each residential zone in our zoning bylaw already has a maximum height. And to me, it doesn't make sense to put a different height restriction on an ARU than we would allow on any other structure. So I'd like to push back and suggest that that one could be removed and simplified to allow greater flexibility. The second one for me is why we care where the two ARUs are. If we are allowing two ARUs, I don't see why we would restrict having two ARUs in a single accessory building. If we would allow to your new provisions that you're proposing, we will allow a two-story building with up to 3 bedrooms. To me, it doesn't matter what that building contains. Maybe it contains 2 bachelor apartments instead of 1 3-bedroom unit. And I don't know that we should be prescribing that in terms of the location. So I would like to propose that we could remove that so long as it meets all of the other requirements around maximum 2 and all of the lot coverage and all of that. And then the third one is on the size. I share Councillor Todd's thinking about the size, but I do now understand that there's the OP and other zoning bylaw constraints we need to live within. So I would say 75%. You know, if this is only, if that restriction is really only there to keep the subordinate status, to me 99% is still subordinate to 100. So I would suggest that we push that percentage to allow maximum flexibility while still working within those other constraints of our policy. And I have shared some motion with the clerk that includes those 3 recommendations.
So why don't we bring that up, and I'll do the same thing as I did with Councillor Mink. I'll ask staff to comment or respond on some of these suggestions.
Thank you, Councillor Clare, and through the mayor. I can just provide some initial response on each of the, and it'll be mostly clarifying because just so that council is aware of what these changes would represent as it would be reflected in the draft zoning bylaw and any suggestions from staff. So with respect to the first provision, to replace the ARU specific height restrictions, so that would mean defaulting to the residential standard table for the main dwelling. So for example, in the urban residential area, generally that maximum height is 11 meters. So it would be moving from our proposed 6.5 meter height restriction to 11 meters. Staff suggestion would remain the same, that if that height was contemplated, then that ARU should be required to abide by the same setback requirements as the main dwelling unit. So looking at a larger rear yard of 7.5 meters and the side yard provisions. And then as well as the total, lot coverage for the site of 45% for all buildings and structures. In the rural area, I believe it's at 10 meters for the rural and agricultural zoned properties. So that's what the height would look like. Right now, staff are proposing 9 meters, so quite similar. With respect to the second proposed provision, staff agree if that we would be able to explore this change to bump up that 75% to still maintain a lesser dwelling size, to maintain the intent of the zoning bylaw and the subordinacy that right now is enshrined in the intent of the zoning bylaw for ARUs. We would recommend for urban residential, similar to the provision that's currently proposed for the rural area, is to add an additional gross floor area cap for ARUs to 100 square meters. So that's still well over 1,000 square feet. This will help, from a staff perspective, mitigate potential site development issues, for example, grading and stormwater, particularly in the urban area, if we have at least a floor area cap there, in addition to, again, that 45%. So that's the only suggestion that I would say we could definitely explore that, but we would suggest adding that 100 square meter cap, very similar to the rural area. And again, trying to strike that balance between trying to be as similar as possible across the urban and rural to help for a better communication and understanding for residents as well. The last one, just reading it. Yes, this is something that staff had discussed, and again, I think it ended up being removed because in prime agricultural areas, you cannot have 2 ARUs in the detached accessory building. However, if council's understanding of this, we could make the change in the other applicable zones. I don't know if Ken, if you have anything to add there, but those are my thoughts.
Nothing to add. No.
Okay, so we have a number of different ideas that have been put forward in the form of motion. So I guess at this point, I want to just check in with if anybody has anything to add to this discussion before we think about whether or not there's a possibility of combining any of this, making any changes to what we've got on the table, and how to move forward in the most efficient way. So just checking around the table. Okay, Councillor Mink has a question. Go ahead.
So just a small question for staff. You did use the term housekeeping change, and you had used the word structural change. So these 3 recommendations there, as well as mine, would they be structural changes, housekeeping changes? How would you categorize them?
Right now, the 4 changes that were proposed in total, those would be changes as directed by council to the zoning bylaw and wouldn't require sweeping changes across the zoning bylaw that I would equate to more of a structural change where we're having to amend tables and permitted uses in each zone.
So I'm just going to go around the table and ask anybody who hasn't been part of this conversation if they would like to add any thoughts or comments. Councillor Darrell, Deputy Mayor. Okay. We may be moving forward quickly, so Councillor Lust. Okay. So then I guess the question is, I think my preference as chair would be that we look at each of these separately as opposed to as a bundle, since that allows us to have a fulsome discussion on each of them. So I will suggest that we go back to Councillor Mink's motion, if we could bring that up. So if I recall correctly, this was going to require a structural change in relation to the official plan. But let's put it on the table and see if we have a mover and seconder so we can have a discussion on this. So Councillor Mink, I assume that you're moving. Deputy Mayor is going to second it. Now it's open to discussion at the table. Councillor Darrell, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, I just fully support Councillor Mink's motion. Talking to rural residents with ARUs, usually the water and septic issues are the deciding factor whether they're going to go forward or not.
Deputy Mayor, did you want to, since you were...
Yeah, I don't really have anything extra to say to this, to me, and I've already spoken with Ken before about this too, about different changes to make things easier for residents to be able to do things like the ARUs and having a restriction like sewer. It's a big thing. So yeah, absolutely, I fully agree with this.
And just a comment back on the official plan requirement that this would entail. I would like to see whether or not we might be able to, when we're talking about time and resources, whether or not it does make sense for us to, I'm also in support of this, but also to provide some direction that this maybe be bundled with a few other things that might be in front of us over the next short while, so that it comes to you as a bundle, even if they are separate issues, that at least there's a cohesive whole when it comes to something that's bypassing the current official plan. Any other comments or thoughts on that? Councillor Mink, how would you feel about that kind of direction to staff?
So I would agree with bundling some items, but I think when we're talking about official plan, I know even though we may be starting it right away, it can be a lengthy process to get to completion. And I think when we're talking about ARUs particularly, this could be life-changing for some families, whether they can do it now or 2 years from now. It can be the difference of spending time with your aging parent, or having, one of your family members suffering from mental illness becoming homeless, or changing a young person's opportunity to find housing. So I think that bundling some of these things together and moving forward as soon as possible when it comes to ARUs particularly is what we should be striving towards.
And I hope I made myself very clear. I'm not suggesting that this should be bundled into an official, OP process that's very lengthy. I'm suggesting that there's probably 2 or 3 other related housing type issues that are pressing that I would like to see bundled so that the planning staff has it all together as opposed to these one-offs. So I was not suggesting for a moment that we're talking about 2-year processes. I'm just saying this, in addition to many other potential requirements to overturn the official plan, also are pressing and timely in terms of housing.
Yes, and that's what I thought you were saying. I was just adding some extra context to it, so yes.
Any other thoughts or comments on that? Okay, so the motion is on the table. We have a first and seconder. I would like to at least have it still open on the table. It doesn't have to be part of the motion for me, but just, again, being cognizant of time and resources to bring forward a few things together to staff that they could work on that are just as timely and pressing. So, all in favor? Okay, that is passed. Thank you. So, moving on to the other motions that are in front of us, we'll do one at a time.
So would you like each of these 3 directions to be bundled in separate motions? Is that what you're asking?
Right.
Yep.
I think that's what the clerk was also suggesting that we do.
Madam Mayor, if I may recommend, I agree that considering these items separately is a good idea. My understanding was that Councillor Mink's motion would be considered separately, and then as these 3 items are being brought forward, these would be considered as one single motion, or Madam Councillor Holloway Wadwani, would you want them to be separate motions?
I mean, I'm in favor of all 3, so to me, it's not an issue. But if there is the will of council to deal with them separately, because council members may have different views on each one of them independently, I'm okay with that. I don't mind.
I'm going to ask, are you strongly opposed to having them dealt with separately? Okay, so then let's proceed with each of them separately in case there are differing thoughts and opinions on each of them. So the first motion is that the staff be directed to replace ARU-specific restrictions on height with language requiring ARUs to comply with overall zone requirements for height. So Councillor Clare has moved this. Is there a seconder on this? seconded by Councillor, it was a tie between Councillor Todd and Councillor Mink. Any discussion? Councillor Less.
Yes, I would like to have hard numbers associated with the heights we are recommending.
Councillor Clare, it's your motion, so you can speak
Yeah,
to
I
it.
think so. I think Director Desta did cover that. So each zone has its own height maximums. So the rural zones have, is it, I think she said 10 meters. In the urban zone, it's 11 meters. So it would be tied to those existing overall zone height restrictions.
Can we put it into this motion?
It would essentially mean that the ARUs would be the same height as the primary dwelling in whichever zone we would be contemplating.
Yeah, my concern is we understand the language. The next council may not understand the language. Pardon?
I'm going to turn it over to our director, and then if the clerk wants to add something, so to the director and then to the clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Less. So in the actual draft zoning bylaw, it would be made very clear with the maximum, that the maximum height would default to the permitted use or the residential standards table for that applicable zone, where the maximum height would be explicitly listed. So for most residential zones, that's 11 meters. That's including the Ward 2 residential, rural residential zone, and then 10 meters for the rural and agricultural properties, I believe. So that would be the permission. And that the way that this is drafted as well is that even if the main dwelling were, say, a single story or 2 stories, so say 6 meters to 9 meters in height, the ARU could still be up to the zone maximum, so 11 meters or 10 meters.
So I'm sorry, I was wrong about that. So it is possible under this motion that the ARU could be taller than the initial dwelling.
That is correct, based on what how I
mistake.
understand the wording.
Did you want to?
I just don't know enough about it that it seems odd to me that you would have an ARU that could be 10 meters or 11 meters, whatever we decided on, in a single-story building attached to it or near it. Just doesn't make sense.
Councillor Clare?
But if we had a 2-story building and a single-story ARU on the same site, it would be the same thing, right?
No, vice versa.
Well, but it's still a 2-story building and a single-story building on the same property, whichever one is primary. To me, in terms of the impact visually and the impact on neighbors, doesn't matter which one's primary or accessory. If there's,
You're going to have.
Councillor Less, can you just put your mic on so we can hear?
So one of the buildings is going to be old, correct? And the new building is going to be taller. It'll look odd.
Councillor Clare?
that's already potentially the case under the provisions already recommended by staff, because we are already allowing in the recommendations before us 2 stories of height on ARUs, including on properties where the primary dwelling is a bungalow. So we're already in that situation. I'm just saying, why not simplify instead of having overlapping requirements specific to ARUs? Let's just follow the overall height for that zone.
So I have a follow-up question to that. If that in fact is the case, then why do we need this? And this is a question for staff.
Sorry, I need to clarify the question. Why do we need the?
Sorry, I was following up with, if Councillor Clare can just repeat her comments. My question was, why do we need this then?
And is your question is for staff or for me in my intent in bringing it forward?
No,
Why I think it's
my question is for staff, based on what your last set of questions, which I think the director may have not heard, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can clarify some things. So as I understand, the proposed draft zoning bylaw does actually currently, the way it's currently proposed, speak to the ARU not exceeding the height of the primary dwelling up to a maximum of 6.5 meters. So as proposed, staff have recommended that there would be that cap on height to match the existing primary dwelling, to Councillor Less's concerns. What Councillor Clare is raising here would eliminate that recommendation.
Councillor Clare.
And I think for me, the rationale is, I think one of the things that we hear, not only is it that there's too many restrictions for ARUs that are prohibitive, so people can't actually build what they want to build. But the other piece of feedback that we do hear regularly is that it's too confusing. There's too many different provisions, and it's unclear, is it the zoning table that matters, or is it there's specific things for ARUs? So part of this process, I think, is supposed to be about eliminating the barriers that exists because it's confusing and onerous and difficult to follow. And to me, there is no real rationale for why we put this height restriction. We have setback requirements, we have maximum heights for those zones. If your neighbor on an empty lot can build a 2.5-story building on their lot, to me, there's no rationale really that's sensical for why you would say, no, you cannot build a 2.5-story building in your backyard so long as you have the lot space and you have the ability to follow the setbacks.
Okay, so we have some clarification on that conversation. Does that also clarify for you, Councillor Less, what you started with in terms of your questions?
Well, you say that you don't want to complicate it because of all these other things that are going on. And there's too many rules, too many regulations, but you don't want to build things at any cost. And that's my point.
Anyone else around the table want to weigh in on this? I do have a question to staff. Can you just explain to us the rationale for why you made the recommendation that the ARU should not exceed the height of the primary dwelling? I'm sure you had conversations about this, so I'm just curious to know if you can maybe share some of the thinking and rationale with us.
The ARU not exceeding the height of the primary dwelling is to maintain that subordinate nature, but we also are considering privacy considerations here. So it does state when, if an accessory additional residential unit exceeds 5 meters, the setback of the primary dwelling will apply. So in some zones, there is a greater setback for that, for the primary dwelling. So that would try to alleviate those privacy considerations.
Thank you. All right, so we have this particular motion on the table. Councillor Clare has moved it. I think I had Councillor Todd seconding. Last chance for any, Councillor Mink, you look like you might, go ahead, ask your question.
No, I'm just contemplating both arguments from Councillor Clare and Councillor Less, and I understand where they're both coming from. And I'm thinking of some of our new developments, especially where there may be bungalow houses and no trees, and someone puts up a very tall structure. It could be very invasive. However, that may only be temporary until those trees grow up, and then it changes. So, and I do understand the argument that Councillor Clare is making too, that there's some structures, especially when you're looking at garages, where that garage, depending on the pitch of the roof, you may have an opportunity to put a loft on a third story, which really then changes that ARU potentially into a dwelling that has 1 or 2 occupants into a family home. So it really broadens those opportunities. So that's why my face was sitting there, like, because I understand both arguments, and I'm trying to figure out which is the best.
And I think simplicity is always a good thing. I don't think we want to intend to make things more difficult. But I don't think that either your proposal or what staff is proposing is one or the other is not more complicated than the other from a constituent perspective. Having said that, we've got a mover and seconder for this. Any final thoughts, conversations? All in favor? And that is passed. Okay, moving on to post. Okay, moving on to the second motion. So the second motion is, I feel like, do you want to read it? Because it's you go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, the second motion is that staff be directed to replace language restricting the size of ARUs in urban residential zones with language allowing the size to be up to the maximum percentage of the primary dwelling as possible without conflicting with other definitions within the zoning bylaw. And this one was amended on the fly during the break between our council meetings today, because when the director provided the same explanation she's now provided publicly, that in order, if you were to allow ARUs to be the same size, physical, like square footage as the main dwelling, we would run into all sorts of other places in our zoning and potentially OP that would have to be amended accordingly. So that is the rationale for the proposed maximum 75% of the main dwelling. And I'm saying that if we are only really concerned about making sure we're not stepping into the weeds on all of those other provisions in our OP and zoning, that 99% is still subordinate. So I'm not putting a number in here. I did float 90% to staff, but allowing staff to go back and take a look at that, to think about if the goal is maximizing the number of ARUs and removing as many barriers as possible, then let's remove this barrier and make it as flexible as possible, with the caveat that the director already explained, that there would be a maximum floor space put on, like there is already for the proposed change to the rural zone.
So just a point of clarification for both yourself and for staff, do we need to be putting a percentage in here in order for us to think about a concrete motion?
Thank you for the question, Mayor. I would recommend adding the 90%. It's something that was discussed with staff, and based on that 90% is something that staff would be comfortable with proceeding with, and adding that 100 square meter floor area cap to the provision as well, which we understand. I don't think that needs to be added to the motion, but it would be helpful for that 90% if council's agreeable.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so looks like we have a convergence on this one between staff and what is being brought forward in the motion. So it's being moved by Councillor Clare and seconded by Councillor Darrell. Any further conversation on this? All in favor? And that is passed. Moving on to the third motion.
The third one is really about us weighing in on the configuration of properties in a way that I think is unnecessary. So right now, it is allowed by right that you can have 2 ARUs. Right now, we will allow you to have 2 ARUs in the main dwelling. So you could have, say, 2 one-bedroom apartments in your basement, or you can have an ARU in the main dwelling and 1 in an accessory building. And I'm saying, why do we care if there's 2 smaller units in 1 accessory building? If we're already allowing a 2-story building with 3 bedrooms, why couldn't that be 2 one-bedroom apartments? the building footprint and everything would still be the same size. So to me, that's an unnecessary provision. And that's the kind of thing that should be left to the property owner to determine what makes sense for their family, for their needs, and for their particular lot.
Okay. Any questions of Councillor Clare before we go to a seconder on this? Councillor Lass?
Yeah, so how many dwellings would be under this proposal, maximum? Would it still be 3?
That is correct. It's still 3 dwelling units total per property.
Thank you.
Okay, to Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Mann.
Thank you. So just to that, that is outside of prime ag though, right? Could I just ask you the quick question? What's the rationale that prime ag only can do the 1 ARU instead of the 2? As you know, we are kind of trying to support farm families as well, right?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Adam, and through the mayor. It's a provision in the provincial planning statement. So I don't exactly know the exact intent why that was added strictly for prime agricultural properties, not for other rural properties. But since it is in our provincial planning statement, I would say that this provision could be applied elsewhere, but not on properties in the agricultural zone. That being said, I will say that on the agricultural zoned properties, and other rural properties, there are other provisions for farm support and for farm help accommodations. So there are some other opportunities for housing that are afforded to that zoning that don't exist elsewhere, but for a different purpose. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact rationale why the PPS distinguishes, makes that distinction and not allowing 2 ARUs in a detached dwelling.
I appreciate that. Are we able to contact the province to figure this out though?
I can contact a MAFA representative. They may be the best resource to assist with that question to get some more clarification.
Councillor Mink?
Thank you. So my question was along the same lines, and maybe you did answer the question. Maybe it is because there are farm dwellings that are permitted, and that may be the reason. I don't know. So it was the same question I was going to ask, but just for clarity, our zoning bylaws are all there's zoning areas are A. Is A considered prime agricultural? We don't have anything that actually says prime.
Yes, and I realize that, and it would be helpful that that same designation carries forward so that it is very clear. But yes, agricultural would be the prime ag.
Okay, and RU, we're good, right?
That's right.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions on this topic? Okay, so we have a mover who would like to be the seconder, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any further discussion on this? All in favor? And that is passed. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'm just glancing down at my notes, which is that we still do have a recommended motion, which is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Darrell, second by the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? And that is passed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4.3, report ES 0626, re-2025 drinking water quality management system management review. Does council have any questions or comments regarding this? Seeing none, the recommended motion is on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Luss, second by Councillor Todd. All in favor? That is passed. Moving on to 4.4, report FIT 0526, Ministry of Transportation, dedicated gas tax funding. Does anybody have any questions on this? Okay, the recommended motion is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Darrell, seconded by Councillor Todd. All in favor? and that is passed. Moving on to 4.5, Report FIT 0626 re 2026 Property Tax Levy Bylaw. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this? Seeing none, we're making good time. Oh, no, Councillor Clare, go ahead.
I just wanted to say it's great to see it combined with the county and to see where it came out overall. And, we don't say it a lot at this table, but thank you, Mayor Elena, for your leadership on that. I know it was a different process this year, and there were some really good moves there that kept the property tax levy to what it is. And looks good.
Good. Hopefully, county can lower their taxes for next year. Can we get a vote on this? All in favor? Thank you. We didn't get a mover. Okay, move by Councillor Clare. I'm going to, because you commented, seconded by Councillor Mink. All in favor? That is passed. We did have a few motions at the county table to reduce the tax, but didn't quite meet our high standards or low standards here in the municipality. Moving to Report 4.6, Report FIT 0726 re 2026 First Quarter Financial Update. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding our financial update? Okay. That went up, both of your hands went up at the same time. So Councillor Todd, do you want to go ahead? Okay.
Yeah, I simply have a comment. I just really appreciated this report. I valued seeing where we're at. Metrics and scorecards, I love them, right? So we can have a look at it and see where things are at for the money. So I just want to say I appreciate that very much.
Councillor Less.
My concern is with the budget for the police, that we are lagging in terms of reporting. In March, we were still dealing with February numbers, and we don't have an accurate budget. And I was contemplating through the board of suspending monthly budget discussions on the police budget and going to quarterly, so it would give finance a time to catch up.
Director Baxter.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have context for your comment. So you will note that Table 2 is the first quarter results for policing services. Our system provides updates on a rolling basis. Effectively, if we have invoices that are added within an hour or two, the system, will provide you an updated outcome.
Yeah.
So.
What I'm saying is February, we didn't have accurate figures. March, we didn't have accurate figures. May now, we have accurate figures for the first quarter.
Councillor, maybe we can talk after. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Like we could have pulled this up for February, the first week of March.
Okay, we'll take it offline.
Any other questions or comments? I just want to echo Councillor Todd's comment that it's very, very helpful for council to be getting these regular updates, very informative, and it positions any council really well for eventual budget discussions. So the recommended motion is to receive this for information. Can I get a mover and seconder for this? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Todd. All in favor? And that is passed. Moving on to Report 4.7, LLS 2026, Encroachment Bylaw following referral to advisory committees and incorporating feedback. I'm going to ask Dave if he would like to introduce the report and speak explicitly to the changes that have been made.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to council, the changes that were made were incorporated through comments received from council at the March COW meeting. The comments we received were directed towards sending it to the advisory or the Accessible Advisory Committee, as well as the Environmental Advisory Committee, as well as putting it through the new EDI framework. So what came with those discussions are we've We've added a appeals process to the bylaw. We've added wording that permits time extensions for staff to give residents that have issues with the bylaw or violations. We've also created an encroachment administrative policy on how that bylaw will be moving forward. So what directors can deny an application for, as well as approve, look at snow clearance, safety, accessibility, walkways, stuff like that. We also presented this because it's also going to affect our temporary patios downtown. So we did present it to the HBIA for their feedback. Given that the feedback was mostly understanding from their part, we've moved ahead with the temporary patio policy. The schedules that you were given showing the schedule amendments will be slightly changed as we've received some feedback pretty much a couple days prior to COW, that by the time it comes to council, you'll see a fee amendment change that more aligns with the patios and how they'll be rolled out.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the update to the potential future tweaks and changes. So at this point, I'm going to ask for any comments. Councillor Clare.
I did want to publicly acknowledge, I really appreciate the changes with respect to temporary placement of sports equipment, and that was a really positive exchange, and I always appreciate your openness to those discussions. But I do have, on behalf of the Environmental Advisory Committee, I know the Environmental Advisory Committee did do a delegation to this council last month. This is one of the bylaws that was included in our review of bylaws through the lens of biodiversity and naturalization, and they did identify a number of clauses in this proposed bylaw that could be seen as barriers to that. So I'm curious, I'm a bit torn, because I understand there is sort of a time sensitivity to this, and I wondered if staff could speak just briefly to sort of balancing the need for this to pass now versus the challenge of passing a new bylaw that might need amendment based on a direction already provided by this council.
So basically, that will fall in line with the intended EAC policy that incorporates our clean yards bylaw, our property standards bylaw, our municipal maintenance bylaw. We'll revisit the tree protection bylaw. Unfortunately, I didn't write that one, so we'll see how that fits. But then it will also include the encroachment bylaw and basically how the enforcement will roll out. So it does fit in with council's direction towards naturalized areas and stuff related to that.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other comments or questions on this? So the recommended motion is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder for this? Moved by Councillor Todd, seconded by Councillor Mink. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you, and that is passed. At this point, we are going to take a 7-minute recess. Thank you. Okay, everyone, we are going to continue on with Agenda Item 5, Notice of Motions, 5.1, Heat Advisory Transit Accessibility Program, and this is moved by Councillor Mink and seconded by Councillor Clare. Did you want to speak to this, Councillor Mink? And then I can ask Council if they have any questions or comments.
Yes, sure. So I'm bringing this forward today. It's actually, my intention is that it's something quite simple. It's about providing the public with safety during extreme heat. The idea came from two places. A resident shared an experience with me, and then it made me reflect on some of my travels in hot climates where transit systems allow for flexibility where it is very hot. So to be very clear, and without overthinking this is not about buses stopping in unsafe locations or disrupting traffic and having large numbers of people on the streets of Port Hope waving down buses. It really is about giving the drivers discretion and autonomy to make safe, humane decisions during extreme extreme heat events. It's allowing them to stop safely and helping someone from distress. So just to give a very sort of a relatable example is you leave Town Park Rec Center, you're in an air-conditioned place, you walked on foot in the morning when it was cool, you've been working out, playing sports all day, you think you're hydrated, and you set out, and all of a sudden you're in a distress situation where you didn't bring money with you, you don't know where the bus stop is, and a bus passes you. This allows you the ability to say, I can't walk further, I can get on that bus, and it allows the bus driver to be able to stop and pick you up. It does align with some of the policies this council brought forward, our climate action plan, and as well as our equity, diversity, and inclusion policy. Extreme heat disproportionately affects seniors, children, people with health conditions, and those without access to vehicles. Why pay as you can? It's not meant to be free, but it's meant to remove barriers in a moment of need. So people can still pay. I would still pay if I had some money, but if you don't have money in that moment and you're caught in a moment of vulnerability and a health risk, that you can board that bus without being denied. So that's the intention of this motion, and I hope to have some support from council.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Mink, and you obviously do have a support in your seconder here at the table. I do actually have a question because when I read this, you were talking about drawing on this example from other municipalities that offer flexible or unscheduled transit stops when it's safe to do so. I have a question. Is this only in relation to heat-related issues, or is it more general? Because I'm also struck by the fact that safety and accessibility extend to other kinds of circumstances. So, for example, at hours where there may not be a lot of public out in the streets and there are single women, and we do know that violence against women is epidemic proportions. Of course, a lot of it is interpersonal violence, but there are safety concerns for those kinds of circumstances, and I'm just wondering if you had contemplated extending beyond just this kind of need.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of these examples that I did pull, many of them are exactly that. They're in the evenings. For decades now, I know, for instance, Ajax Transit, when it was his own transit, you boarded the bus in the evenings and told the bus driver your address. That was long before we had internet accessible and GPS, and that bus driver was expected to find your home and drop you off. Chatham now, as an example, has a system in their bus where they can plug it in and they take you to your home in the evening. So absolutely, those are the examples. They're not heat related. Those ones are more related to the evenings, and certainly that's something we can explore. I was just thinking about heat because we're heading into that season, but yeah.
So I'm wondering if we might be able to expand this just a little bit, but Councillor Doyle.
Totally agree with what both of you just said. I think a lot about the winter weather. Seniors often have more mobility issues in the winter, and it's harder for them to travel around. So I think maybe just going to, and in general, the bus driver, transit driver discretion about wave over stops maybe is just the way to go for all situations.
Good point. Any other comments on this, Councillor Todd?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Darrell. In fact, that was going to be my comment, is that we should be doing both extreme weather situations as well as what the mayor is saying is in some of the other situations.
Councillor Clare.
I would definitely still be happy to second a motion if it was amended to include both extreme heat and extreme winter weather events. I'm looking at the director. I'm wondering, I know that this did go back and forth quite a bit with our transit department, and the whole flagging down stops is relatively new. And I'm wondering for the council, is it better for us to look at this as a pilot where we get used to doing this and seeing how it's working in the cases of these extreme weather events where we know there's particular vulnerability, and then see about extending it as an all as a regular feature of the transit program.
Councillor Mick.
So my thought with the heat particularly is that there isn't as many barriers roadside in the summer. And I was also thinking along the lines of climate action, where in heat events we want fewer people driving vehicles. We want to encourage rideshare in every way. Whereas in the winter, I did think of that. However, we do have the roadside that may not be as visible with snowbanks and so on, so that does create potentially, the idea is not to create a safety risk by making a health and safety decision, and that's why I didn't bring the snow into this one at this time.
Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I think your motion also speaks to it, which is when the driver can do it safely, and there may be less opportunity in the winter, but when there is opportunity, I think it's worth taking it.
Thank you, and I do want to also echo, obviously, if we're doing an EDI analysis of accessible and safe transportation, then it should actually cover the entire gamut, whether we start with a pilot and see how that goes in terms of lessons learned. I don't have a concern with that as long as we don't lose sight in the future for what might this look like in the winter and in all seasons, safety concerns for some of our more vulnerable members of the population. Todd?
Yeah, I agree with the pilot, and I think we should then establish what are the metrics of success on it. So what would we look at, or what would the future council look like at the end, or look for at the end of the pilot to recognize whether it's success? Are we going to look at the number of people we picked up? Are we going to look at how it impacted fares? Yeah.
And Councillor Mink really wants to answer this.
So that was part of the original motion, but I have found out that recording our ridership is very manual at this process. So that could be an investment that this council may consider looking towards, having some sort of automatic counter where they're not checking, but I guess maybe the director could add to that. But I did have that, but it just wasn't as practical.
Director, do you want to speak to this while we're on the topic?
With respect to health and safety of drivers, their priority is driving. We do not have the technology to allow for tracking. So the reporting on a pilot is very difficult.
Okay, yeah, go. I can anticipate.
Yeah. Could we do it simply based on fare? Because we'll record how much fare is being picked up, so we could monitor fare?
Again, very challenging because we don't track if it was a pass, if it was cash.
So can I just circle back and ask then, how could we determine if this is going to be working to meet the needs even of this proposed motion for the folks that might be needing this kind of access?
Based on the discussion with Councillor Mink, that is why we removed it and made it not a pilot, because it is very difficult to track and assess.
Yes, I understand that it's difficult, but then how do we as a council know if this is actually meeting the intended goal of this motion? CAO?
I think through you, Chair, I think the challenge will be, the fare things, this pay as you wish sort of approach. So whether you throw a loonie in or 10 cents or whatever, that will be the challenge. I think the easier metric will be how many flag downs do we get? I mean, I think the drivers can record those flag downs to see how successful it was, what the uptake was. I don't think that'll be a challenge, but the fare was up and down, pay as you go or pay as you can afford. That might be the bigger challenge to the director's point.
Just before we finish this, did you want to? No.
That's fine. I think that if that is the easiest metric that we can have tracked, that would be one that we can track for success. Especially as we go through, we can set our baseline to see what what we're doing and whether or not there's value in there. Yeah.
Councillor Clare.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure why we feel, just because it's a pilot, I don't know that we necessarily need to prove that it's meeting the need. I mean, where are we going to say, well, only 5 people used it, therefore it's not beneficial? I don't think so. To me, it's more about, is it feasible? Does it work for our transit drivers? Is it safe? Are we experiencing challenges? I'm more thinking about what constraints might we discover through the pilot that we would want to consider for how we operationalize it more broadly. That was my intent in thinking about the pilot, not that we're proving that this is helpful, because I think it is helpful for the people it will be helpful for, and that will be changing year over year too.
I don't disagree with that necessarily, but I do think it would be great to collect anecdotal, some kind of response from drivers about this, as well as how many people are actually using it. I don't see any downside from having that kind of information. Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think it would be preferable if it's not a pilot. Like, let's not call it a pilot. This is what it is, and we can still be tracking how do we improve it over time and evolve it. There's no need to call it a pilot. We can just implement it.
Okay, final comment, Councillor Mink.
So yes, and just along this conversation too, I think there's still the challenge of having the word out. So if we are tracking a success rate, it will take some time for people to even know that this exists unless we communicate it on those heat advisory days and, potentially have magnets on the buses or whatever, or something to let people know that this is a heat advisory day, hop on the bus. If the community doesn't know, then no one's going to use it, right? So that is an important factor as well.
Okay, I think we've had a really good conversation around this. We have a motion on the table that's got a mover and a seconder. All in favor? Oh, yes, CEO.
Sorry, through Chair. Just for clarification, there was discussion about extreme cold. Was that landed on? We were not including that, or we are including that in the motion?
I understood that we were considering the motion in front of us. If the mover and seconder would like to make an amendment to this to reflect any of the conversations we've been having, I will leave it to them. Councillor Clare.
I'm thinking out loud here. But what if we were to add something to the motion that asks the director to report to council after this warm months, the hot months, with recommendations for rolling this out as a standard service?
Did you want to comment back on that, Director?
That also was considered as part of the original notice of motion and was removed.
Okay, I think we need to find some kind of middle ground here to be able to move forward on this. So I think what we've heard around the table is some collection of anecdotal evidence, some very informal counting of how many people are flagging down, a concern about ensuring that there's good communication around this, and then thinking about, whether this can be built on for winter months and other safety concerns. So the question is, do we want to wait and see how this goes? We're not calling it a pilot, we're just taking it as it stands with future consideration to expanding this, or do we want to talk about the fact that this is a starting place and that we're adding 2 other considerations to it in terms of overall safety and winter months? So it's your motion, so I'll turn it back to you.
I think without having those discussions with the director about the winter months, I would prefer to leave it as is and maybe add with future considerations of adding it to other seasons. Just because, we may have a winter with no snow, but it's freezing, then that's okay. We could have a winter where it's snowing every day and it's not safe for a driver to stop. So I think that warrants more discussion. So I think just leaving it open for future considerations for other seasons is where we should leave it.
And thank you for that comment. Would you consider, since safety does not have seasons, to also expand it to safety considerations?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, the safety considerations of other seasons.
No, I'm talking about, for example, vulnerable young women in our community.
Oh, that one, yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So could you maybe just suggest a wording around that?
I can't think of a wording. I guess it would be to give, okay, there we have the clerk here with her hand up, so that's great. She saves the day.
Madam Mayor, through you, I have not changed the body of the motion that was presented to council today, so I'm not going to go through and show you all of that, but I will show the last statement that was added, and Councillor Mink, you can feel free to amend as you see fit, but it's just included that, and staff consider adding similar considerations for other seasons, including safety considerations such as for vulnerable persons in the community. Or I can change that to how.
Councillor Mink.
The word of vulnerable, I think that's an actual term, vulnerable persons, that has a different meaning. So I don't know if that's the right word.
So just included as well as safety
considerations
for all people?
I guess for all safety, I don't know, for all, I don't know. The Mayor, what were you thinking?
Safety considerations.
Okay, safety considerations.
I think that's more inclusive, yes.
So Madam Mayor, through you, that would be the only.
Okay, so that's a friendly amendment. Mover, are you okay with that as a seconder? Any further discussion? All in favor? And that is passed. Thank you. Okay, moving on to updates and new business. There are a few to share, so I'll try to get through them as quickly as possible. The first update is that the CAO and Leo, who's Special Projects, and myself attended the Canadian Nuclear Association conference last week, Power and Purpose. This was a very large conference. There were about 1,800 attendees, and I would say that there were 3 tasks that we had in front of us in attending the conference. One is education, second is information sharing, and the third would be networking and / advocacy. I think it was a really invaluable time that we spent in Ottawa learning from experiences of others in the province, across Canada, and internationally. What might be interesting for the community to know is that whilst Ontario is typically seen as a leader in the expansion of nuclear energy, that expansion is now taking hold right across Canada, including in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, Manitoba is now contemplating it, and New Brunswick, as well as a growing international community as a commitment to a clean energy future. In fact, I think last count, there are about 38 countries that have, as part of their COP commitments, committed to the expansion of nuclear energy. So very much it was a conference that was embedded from everything from the local to the international. The CAO and I had the opportunity to present on a panel entitled Building Nuclear Near Communities, Lessons for Canada's Next Wave of Sites. And during our presentation, I'm going to just give you a breakdown. There has been some interest in what we had talked about, so I'm going to share that. We provided background and context for Port Hope because there's still folks that don't know where Port Hope is, so we did that. We talked about our state of readiness or not readiness and what kind of due diligence that we are undertaking as part of the process that we are in. We talked about the importance of building relationships, including with rights holders, obtaining growth readiness in order for our municipality to be able to be part of the engagement and the discussions, and that includes the importance of growing our organizational staff capacity so that our normal course of business is not affected by this commitment for engagement in this process. We also talked about the importance of securing provincial cross-ministerial liaisons, which we have now in place, and a commitment to having biannual interministerial meetings on this file. And we also talked about the establishment of Ontario and Canada's first youth nuclear AI Centre of Excellence. And I had an opportunity to speak to over 20 industry representatives that are very interested in supporting this initiative for youth in our community. We also talked about near-term challenges for the municipality, from staff recruitment and retention to the rapid process of the impact assessment that we talked about earlier today. We talked about the challenges of clear communication to the public and the real and growing challenge of misinformation that is out there. We talked about the major infrastructure needs of our community, and we talked about the challenges of the continuity of the project in an election year. And we also touched on some of the future challenges that we know we are going to be facing. We have to start thinking about them now, whether they're in relation to housing, to transportation, to health, to emergency preparedness, to education, to social supports. So it was a packed room. I think we had about 200 participants in the room, a good discussion after, and I certainly think that it opened up the eyes to other communities that are thinking about entering into discussions on similar types of projects. And I think it certainly demonstrated that our municipality is being very strategic and very purposeful in its planning and its preparedness. We also had the opportunity to attend a CANAC meeting, and that's the Canadian Association of Nuclear Host Communities, where we were able to share experiences and knowledge, very invaluable, especially in terms of learning from other communities that are further advanced than we are, in particular in relation to host agreements. I mean, that's a number of years down the line, but eyes wide open to what we need to be thinking about at this stage. And then I think there's a lot of learning from other communities that are even at an earlier stage than we are in the process. So it was a very dynamic conversation. We also had the CAO and president of CNSC attend that meeting. And my question to him was whether he could influence through the CNSC IAC, ensuring that the municipality of Port Hope was recognized as a partner in the IAC process, and he had promised that he would take that away and ensure that that conversation was had. So there were lots of moments like that where we're able to insert ourselves into conversation, knowledge share, and advocate for the municipality as we go through this very complicated multi-year process. On an individual level, I was able to meet with the president and CEO of ACL, the CEO of Cameco, the president and CEO of CanDo, top executives of Westinghouse, and our CAO also had the opportunity to meet with the president of Westinghouse. I met with the president and CEO of OPG, along with our CAO, the president and CEO of CNSC, and our CAO had the opportunity to meet directly with the president of IAC. So that gives you an overview of the days that we spent in Ottawa, and I'll turn it over to the CEO if there's something that you would like to add to that report.
That was, through you, Chair, that was extensive. It was a action-packed 3 days. We did meet. I think that the greatest benefit, I think, was realizing when we mentioned the name Port Hope, people really started recognizing Port Hope. And I think that's where we're reaching out on not just the provincial stage, but the national and global stage as well. So we need to be prepared for that. And I think those connections that we made with those high-level executives, they recognize our plight. They recognize that we need the support going forward. And we did our best to advocate for this community, for the best benefit of this community. So it was a very fruitful conference in my mind, making those connections.
Thank you to the CIO for that. And I'll just continue to say that one of the important keynotes that we had the opportunity to hear was by Minister Tim Hodgson, who's the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. At the conference, he announced that NRCan, which is Natural Resources Canada, is developing a new nuclear energy strategy for Canada that's going to be released by the end of 2026, and that strategy is going to be organized around 4 pillars. The first, enabling new builds across Canada. The second is being a global supplier and exporter of choice. The third, expanding uranium production and nuclear fuel opportunities. And the fourth, developing new Canadian nuclear innovation. So that is a strategy that we will be seeing at the end of the year. And the minister did emphasize that the Government of Canada is focusing on delivering secure, affordable, and clean electricity, that it is very committed to energy security and competitiveness on the nuclear stage, and to further advancing Canada's nuclear leadership in the world. So that was an important announcement and definitely something to be keeping an eye on, and had the opportunity to also meet the minister. He's accepted my invitation to come and visit Port Hope. And fun fact, he actually knew where Port Hope was, and his children went to school in Port Hope. So these are those moments of connection and networking that allow us, I think, to continue forward with the conversations and engagement, and to really see what we're a part of is being a local, a provincial, a federal, and in many ways an international initiative. Okay, moving on from those announcements to shorter announcements. The Bylaw Division, I would like to inform residents that the Bylaw Division has relocated and can now be found at 5 Mill Street South. You can visit the new location to pay parking tickets or speak directly with a municipal law enforcement officer. Civic Awards, what an amazing evening that was. Last Thursday, of course, we hosted the annual awards ceremony at Capitol Theatre. We all know that Port Hope is made stronger and more passionate because of the generosity of all of our residents. The awards ceremony is such an important opportunity to recognize those that go above and beyond for our community. I want to thank again our committee, our Civic Awards Committee. Deputy Mayor, you sit on that. A special shout out to our events team, Jeannie and Cheryl, to all those who took the time to put forward a nomination, to all our nominees, and of course, all of our winners. Everybody came together to make it a really wonderful event. Is there something that you would like to add, Deputy Mayor, to that?
Sure, thank you. You took like all my highlights, so. Yeah, absolutely. And the committee, it didn't just work just on that one day for the event. It worked throughout the entire year, meeting after meeting. I'd also like to highlight the fact that our 2 youth councillors joined. They joined us up on stage for the entire ceremony, but also they've been joining us for every one of the committee meetings dating back to, I don't even remember, maybe like November, December. So that has been a very nice highlight, and it's also been a great addition to the Civic Awards Committee. And I realized that you had already thanked Jeannie and Cheryl. I'd also like to thank them again. They're such hard workers, and wow, they're organized. It is so nice. Also, Emma McCarroll, who sits as staff as well through the clerk's office, and has done an incredible job all throughout. The one last thing is I'd like to congratulate all the winners But on top of that, a little special congratulations to Owen Price as our outstanding youth, and to Peter Abrams as our new outstanding citizen for this year. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor, and of course to the Capitol Theatre for always hosting our wonderful event. Moving on, an update on Garden Hill subdivision, 3852 Ganaraska Road. So just a few points of an update here. Mistral has submitted plans to clear the draft plan conditions for the subdivision. This is a technical review process. However, once the technical review is complete, planning staff will provide a recommendation report to council for decision regarding final approval. Building Services has issued demolition permits for the existing house and shed at 3852 Ganaraska Road. Although the existing barn was not included in the demolition permit application, we are in the process of receiving a further application to demolish the barn. Applicable conditions of the draft approval for the subdivision will be reviewed by staff prior when reviewing this demolition permit application. Staff are not currently in receipt of any plans for a proposed model home. Staff will continue to work under the existing planning framework when considering any application for a model home development for this subdivision, including reviewing applicable conditions of draft approval and provisions of the zoning bylaw for model homes. Staff continue to work diligently to manage the project and its various technical components. Mistral has confirmed that they are following the Planning Act as it relates to not prematurely selling lots in advance of subdivision registration. They are currently only taking reservations and not executing purchase and sales agreement. So that is the update on the Garden Hill subdivision. And finally, moving on to an update in relation to 41 Yonge Street. Community engagement opportunity for 41 Yonge Street. The municipality of Port Hope is inviting residents to learn more about the future of the municipality-owned property located at 41 Yonge Street and to take part in a community engagement process. The property is currently designated as parkland in the official plan and zoned as open space. Council has identified the need to increase affordable housing options in Port Hope and has directed staff to explore whether this site could contribute to meeting that end. The land was recently remediated through the PHAI. With this work now complete, we are beginning conversations with the community about potential future uses of the site. We are committed to open, honest, and meaningful engagement, and community input will play an important role in informing any future decisions for this property. So the community open house, I have some information about this. Residents are encouraged to attend the upcoming open house to learn more, ask questions, and share their perspectives before any decisions are made. The open house is May 13th. The time is 5 to 7 p.m. at the Town Park Recreation Centre, room 3. And to give you a little bit of information about the open house, staff will share information on why the site was selected for consideration, discuss early land use ideas, including affordable housing options, provide information on the purpose and benefits of affordable housing, gather feedback on opportunities to retain parkland or park features on this site, and most importantly, the open house provides an opportunity for residents to ask questions, offer comments, and contribute ideas. And of course, you can also provide your feedback online. Residents who are unable to attend in person are encouraged, you can email the clerk, you can email any of us on council, or you can provide feedback at engage.porthope.ca/41-Young. So before I move on to asking our council for any updates or new business, I'm going to turn it over to the clerk to provide some more updates on the upcoming municipal election.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity to provide some updates to members of the public as well as council on just some election activities that are taking place, because the municipal election, the municipal and school board election, will be taking place on October 26, 2026, which is just shy of 6 months away. So as a reminder, the nomination period is now open. It opened on Friday, May 1st. It closes at 2 p.m. on August 21st, 2026. Not 2:05, not 2:10, not 4 p.m., 2 p.m. on August 21st, 2026 is the close of nomination. So anyone who is interested in running in the 2026 municipal election, we are encouraging you to make an appointment with the clerk, myself, or the deputy clerk in order to file your nomination papers. We also have a very comprehensive candidate information guide that we have available at our clerk's office. Just reach out to us. We're happy to provide you with a copy. The candidate information guide contains a lot of really, really critical information for anyone who is planning on running for council. This includes information not only on your roles and responsibilities as an elected official, but also your roles and responsibilities in terms of the financial filing obligations that you would have as a candidate, as well as other prescribed forms that you'd be required to fill out. And we are requesting, as I said earlier, that anybody who is interested in running make an appointment with the clerk and deputy clerk so that we can walk you through that process. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the other activities that we have undertaken in order to engage those that are interested in running for council. So on April 29th, the Municipality of Port Hope's clerk's office, in partnership with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, held its first candidate information session. So this was on April 29th at 6 p.m. During the session, myself as well as the deputy clerk talked about some of the various aspects that anybody who is interested in running for council should consider. This includes things like, considerations of life under public scrutiny, the role of councillors on advisory committees, all of the issues related with an overview of the Municipal Elections Act, the role of the time commitment. All of these things were considered as part of that training. The ministry was also there available, providing very detailed training on, as I said, financial filing obligations, integrity, code of conduct, integrity commissioner role, all of those things that are very, very pertinent for anyone who is considering running for office, for them to know and consider prior to filing their nomination. We had quite a bit of engagement online as well as in person, and all of those sessions are actually posted online at porthopevotes.ca. So if you were not able to attend and you are considering throwing your hat in the ring, I do encourage you to visit porthopevotes.ca and you can watch those sessions. They are available for all candidates as well as members of the public. I also want to state that we have a second candidate information session that is going to be held on Thursday, May 14th at 6:30 p.m. At the Northumberland County headquarters. So this is also in partnership with MMAH, and all lower tier municipalities are going to be attending this joint session, and there will be information available with respect to some of the similar things that I mentioned earlier, with respect to financial filing obligations and information from MMAH. And we will be there, the deputy clerk and I, with a booth, and happy to answer any questions from a Port Hope perspective. Lastly, just want to say that on just flipping sides a little bit from candidates to voters, we are consistently encouraging voters to ensure that their information is correct on the voters list. That information on how to check to see if your information is correct is available on porthopevotes.ca. Please continue to visit that website. We update it regularly, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach us at either clerk@porthope.ca or elections@porthope.ca. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the work and effort that you're putting into this. Much appreciated. Now turning over to council members, does anybody else have any updates that they would like to share around the table? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So as many people around the community have probably noticed, this is National Youth Week. On Sunday, Councillor Les and I had a great opportunity to going out to the season opener of the Pump Park and the skate park, as well as there was a youth vendor inside the rec center. It was very, very well attended, and it was a great event. And thank you to the staff. There was also a free barbecue there, and thank you to all the youth that came out to participate, as well as some of the adults there that were helping the youth along. Honestly, it was really nice to see in the Pump Park having some of our adults there actually hands-on helping the kids around the Pump Park. It was great to see. I'd also like to highlight that I believe it's this Thursday is the police versus youth volleyball game from 3 to 5, and I think that's going to be a very fun way to cap off the National Youth Week. So thank you.
Thank you for those updates. Anyone else around the table? Okay, so we're just going to give staff a moment now to exit just before we go into our final question period. Okay, we're now moving into question period. Please remember the purpose of question period is to make inquiries of council members related to matters of municipal business. It's not an avenue to ask questions of staff. If you have questions specifically for council members, you can ask them now. And I've got additional direction here that council is happy to speak on decisions, policies, and priorities, the why, and not the how and the when. Having said that, of course, if we are not able to answer your questions at this table, you will get a fulsome response back from the appropriate staff member. So if you do have a question for us, please come forward to the microphone and state your name, and the staff will turn the microphone on for you.
My name is Greg Burns. I live in Garden Hill. And first of all, I'd like to thank for the update relative to the subdivision in Garden Hill. The questions I have relate to that same subdivision. Council has not granted final approval of the Garden Hill subdivision as yet. There are 69 conditions that you mentioned earlier as part of the Ontario Land Tribunal decision that need to be met first, including a 2-year groundwater monitoring program. One of the questions I have is, how can staff allow a model home to be constructed on that site? Condition 62 makes it very clear in the conditions of draft approval, quote, that the owner shall agree in the subdivision agreement that no building permits will be applied for or issued until the municipality of Port Hope is satisfied that adequate road access, hydro service, and storm drainage facilities are available to service the proposed development.
Thank you for that question, Greg. And I'm going to just highlight one point from my comments that I made earlier, and we'll get you a fuller answer from staff later. But the comment I made earlier is staff are not currently in receipt of any plans for a proposed model home.
I find that rather amazing when in fact we were advised by a staff member that discussion had taken place probably about 3 to 4 weeks ago. The concern I have is that if you go online to Mistrial, they are currently advertising the types of homes, the price of homes, and that occupancy for the first 16 lots is 2027.
Okay. We will make sure that any inconsistencies in the responses you have received are clarified.
Thank you. The second area, you did provide some answers earlier in your comments, so I'll avoid one of the questions I had. The next one has to do with the barn. You had mentioned the fact that there's a potential that they will be requesting a permit to demolish the barn. Has a barn swallow habitat plan being submitted and approved for Block 108? Has the municipality confirmed with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks that demolition activity in proximity to the barn during the current breeding season is permissible? If not, what steps is the municipality taking to ensure that the developer is not in breach of federal protection obligations? And I'll give an example. About 2 weeks ago, I was driving home, slowed down because I noticed that there was a front-end loader pushing trees that had been cut down past the barn. Those trees that were cut were literally that far from the edge of the barn. This is the prime breeding season for the barn swallow. So I find it amazing that this is being allowed to happen and that a front-end loader, okay, and let's say demolition of the house and the shed right adjacent to the barn is being allowed to occur during prime breeding season. So what I'm asking is, has that been checked relative to the endangered species that exist in that barn?
Thank you for that question, and we will ensure that you get a fulsome response to that as well, Greg.
Okay. And the last one that I have is, can council confirm whether the required Ministry of Environmental Conservation and Parks consultation regarding the Blandings turtle habitat in Block 108 has been completed? If not, has the municipality advised the developer that work in proximity to that area, and that I emphasize cannot proceed until consultation is complete? What role does the municipality play in ensuring the developer meets its federal species at risk obligations before the site activity begins?
And we have recorded that question, and you will be given a fulsome response to that as well.
Okay.
So thank you for bringing forward those questions, and staff will get back to you with a fulsome response.
Okay. May I have an idea? Can you give me an idea as to how soon that's going to happen? I will give you an idea. I have 150 people on an email list in the Garden Hill area. I'm being inundated with questions regarding the tape and fence that's been placed, and the fact that there's going to be some elimination on the property.
I hear your concern, and so I'm actually... Here I am going to ask the CAO if I can get some guidance on how long it will take to get back to Mr. Burns with a response to these questions.
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Burns. I think I do want to consult with the Director of Development Services on the timing of the response. We have received multiple emails from the Garden Hill Group and members of that Garden Hill Group with the very same questions. We have responded as best we can at this point in time based on the information that we have. We will endeavor to resurrect some of those responses and get them out, I'm hoping, within the next week. Within the next week, we'll try to get
next week. Thank you. I'd like to be able to confirm this with the people that have been questioning what's going on, because I hate to see things happening where people are knocking on my door, et cetera, and some misguided information.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate it if I can get those responses as soon as possible.
Okay. We can commit to within a week to have those responses to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Any further questions?
Ed White, Mill Street. I don't know whether it's a question or a comment, but it was...
Ed, it has to be a question.
Okay, so why does it seem to happen that a very good idea, very simple idea of being able to flag down a bus for people in extreme heat or whatever, why does it have to turn into such a I don't know, whatever you want to call what happened here today with all the oh well, we got to have a survey and it's got to be official and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, you can give the bus driver a clicker and he can say he picked up 5 people, you know, like it. I don't understand why it had to turn into that. And if you want my other question, I'll give it to you the way.
Can I respond to the first one?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I appreciate that it might look frustrating from where you're sitting. I think in discussing this, we wanted to make sure that while we had something like this at the table, that we were considering all other possibilities of when it might be appropriate for community members to be able to flag down a bus. And that was the discussion around that. In terms of how do we know if something is working, I agree with you. I don't think it has to be super sophisticated. I think we were landing on a place where we said it can be a very simple way of collecting information, but we do need to collect information. It's an important part of the kind of work that we do, and it informs the kind of decisions that we make. And so I would say that it might be frustrating for you in the audience to listen to us talk through these kinds of issues, but it's a very thoughtful conversation that we're having at the table. And at the end of the day, I think we landed on a very good decision for the community.
Another part of, I guess, the same idea is, how do we go from flagging down buses in extreme heat to conversations about dropping people off, like making sure people get home, making sure people are safe for different reasons at different times. Would this be on, or would it be considered to be on, the bus routes? Okay, is this safety thing would be considered for just the existing bus routes, or in extreme conditions, would the bus driver, you mentioned addresses, would the bus driver go around the block and drop somebody off? Or, that part I didn't understand.
Okay. I'm going to actually turn to Councillor Ming, because she was the one that was speaking to some of these things, and it was her motion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the idea is for the motion that was brought forward was on the route. So if a stop is at one intersection and that person is an intersection behind, rather than try to race forward to get the bus, they can just flag it and get on. Same with letting off. If you're passing your home, instead of the bus going 500 meters ahead, you could say, that's my house, can you let me off there? The discussion then came forward as to what happens in some communities in the evenings, where buses in the dark do have the option of going off the path to drop passengers off. So that wasn't included in the motion, but that was part of our discussion.
They have that option now?
In some communities, they do not in this community.
I mean, we're a small community, so we want to take care of everybody. I would think that if somebody was in distress, the bus would stop anyway.
Right.
Without having all kinds of rules and regulations. All right, I was just confused about the bus route thing. That's the...
Yeah, the intention is to stay, as it's moved, to stay on the route, but if you see it passing, you can put your hand up to board the bus.
Understood. Thank you.
Ed, can I give you a ride home so you don't have to use the bus?
Thank you for your questions, Ed. Yes.
Chris Wallace, Walton Street. The additional residential unit report draft bylaw, I think, is excellent, but there's one possible omission. I'm wondering whether it's been adequately covered, and that's the issue of utility questions, utility connections, particularly water and sewage. You add housing units, you add a load demand for water, for sewage. Typical approach is to simply connect to the systems of the existing house. The capacity isn't always there. The capacity, the ability to add brand new connections isn't always there. So the issue really is whether or not it should be addressed right at the outset, not only whether it complies with the zoning bylaw, but whether or not the proper connections can be made. Having worked on a number of similar projects in Toronto, this quite often is a deal breaker.
I think that's a great question, and it's something that our staff always considers for any new projects, and I'm sure that the planning department has contemplated this as part of this initiative, and I'm happy to give you a more fulsome response directly from staff.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
On the ARUs, just about, want to bring up again about on prime agriculture. So the October 20th, 2024 provincial policy statement does say that 2 are permitted. 1 has to be in or attached to the principal dwelling, and then you're allowed one separate. So if they're writing that bylaw and it says only one, we don't want to add restrictions that are going to limit what you're allowed to do when we're trying to build a housing surplus.
So is the question, is the staff aware of
Yes,
this?
is the staff aware of
Okay.
it? Yeah, okay.
Thank you for that question, Jamie.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. And thank you. We will definitely make sure that we ask that question to staff explicitly. Okay, any other questions this evening? Okay, seeing none, this concludes our business to be covered on today's agenda, and I'm now in a position to adjourn the Committee of the Whole at 8:52 p.m. Thank you very much for your attendance.